Good morning, everyone. I'm here to welcome Hilda Bastian. Hilda is a health consumer advocate extraordinaire. She is a founding member of several different groups, including the Consumers Health Forum of Australia, the Cochrane Collaboration, and its Consumers and Communication Review Group. Hilda is currently leading the PubMed Health team and PubMed Commons at NIH and working to make a clinical effectiveness research accessible. She also explores the humorous side of clinical epidemiology in her cartoon blog, Statistically Funny. And these are just a few of Hilda's accolades and experiences. Her bio is in her packets if you'd like to learn more about her. And she'll be talking to us this morning about how Twitter has impacted community discussions about controversial healthcare topics. So please join me in welcoming Hilda Bastian.
G'day. I'm Hilda Bastian and I love Twitter. How many people here, if you don't mind my asking, are people who are not particularly fond of Twitter or aren't particularly interested in it? Okay, good, thanks. I hope that'll change, but anyway, give it a go. The first thing I should say is that everything that I say, although I work at the NIH, that everything I say is a personal opinion and doesn't reflect any of the organisations any of the organisation that I work for or the US government. And in addition, I also am not speaking for the Public Library of Science, which is one of the places that I blog. So I thought I'd actually start with talking about social media in general and where Twitter fits in with that, because I think it's sort of, especially in this issue about how what is the role that Twitter plays in terms of controversies and the kind of role that organisations like yours can play, and all of us as individuals. Manuel Castells, who's a very terrific sociologist, particularly on this subject, actually points out that the internet and social networks in particular have actually been really quite revolutionary in terms of how communities organise and what the kind of possibility for kind of activists and all sorts of things are because of it. And I think that this part of what he talks about is actually really quite important and kind of clarifies that this is actually it enables mass self-communication strategies. And that is actually really quite a transformative technology when you actually start to think about it. And it's no wonder that it's kind of having such a big impact in so many different ways. But it isn't only, that sort of sounds like a really, really positive thing, but this is also true of a lot of kind of like negative campaigns. So a lot of the kind of struggle around racism and misogyny and a whole lot of those kinds of things, they're happening online too now. And so you're sort of seeing a real growth of all kinds of interpersonal communications. And we're not really yet at all used to what that means and how to make the most of it and how to handle it. And I'll come back to that again in a minute. Now, Twitter is actually, every kind of social media or social network is actually really quite different in terms of what it does and what it can do, and what it might do in the future, and who's involved in it and what it's good for. I mean, that makes it kind of like difficult as there's more and more of them, because you've kind of got to work out different people like different ones, and they've all got their own unique cultures and their strengths and weaknesses. And some people kind of cross a real lot of different platforms, and some people are just very specifically in one. Twitter it has got some things that are actually quite unusual. There's many things that are very, very typical of pretty much any social network. But Twitter's actually got some that are actually quite specific to it. One of those is that I think it is, that not in the way everybody uses it, but in the way that a lot of people use it. It's really about direct contact with strangers and people you don't know. It's kind of, in a sense, it's almost like the opposite of what Facebook tends to be. And it tends to be also a lot that it's a bit more of a broadcast medium than some other kinds of social networks. Part of that's because of who's on it. Like, journalists are massive adopters of Twitter, and that's kind of like really shaped Twitter culture, and also who's there. There's about, Pew estimates that in 2015, about 20% of Americans, and a bit more than that, of Americans who are online are actually on Twitter in some way, are active in Twitter in some way. They tend to be younger. They tend to be more in, there's twice as many people who live in real cities who are on Twitter as in rural areas. They tend to be younger. When you look at the kind of, they give the data in terms of the percentage of people who are online, of that, then people who are white, non-Hispanic, are actually less on Twitter than other ethnic groups, and use it in different ways. So it's really quite a different specific one. Some kind of these ones are actually very, very female kind of social networks, like Pinterest is a bit more kind of female. Some are really, really tend to be more male, like Reddit tends to be, more of a guy thing. And Twitter is kind of a lot more balanced in terms of gender. So it's actually really quite a specific kind of culture. It's the whole hashtag kind of process in Twitter has actually turned out to be a really quite something of a social phenomenon, and it kind of leaks over as people who even aren't into Twitter, you'll start to see that people actually report what's happening on Twitter, so that's news. I happen to think it is, even though it is only 20% of people. But it has become a place where where people will kind of react about all sorts of things. It's definitely a place of activism and protest. There's kind of part of the culture also is almost like a naming, not almost like, there's a real kind of naming and shaming kind of aspect to Twitter, which some people hate, and we can talk about more later. I think it's actually terribly important, potentially. Given how many other things don't tend to necessarily work as well as we might hope they would have. It's definitely a place that people praise and discuss. And then there's the information sharing aspect. Now, that one for me is actually incredibly important. I don't know where I'd be if they suddenly took Twitter off tomorrow, because it has really become kind of like one of the major ways that I find out information, and the kind of transaction costs of sharing information are so incredibly low. You could be sitting in a meeting and somebody says something interesting, and you just like tweet it out, and so somebody will suddenly be sitting in whatever, a conference or an FDA meeting or something. Now, they're not going to actually, unless you happen to come across them that day and they might mention to you what they just heard, that information isn't really going to spread out. You're not really going to go and write an article about it or something, or write a section necessarily about every little interesting thing you find in your newsletter or something like that. But just sending out a tweet is quick and easy. That actually ends up being kind of like one of the problems of Twitter, because everything that's the kind of strength of Twitter is also one of the things that can make it difficult. It means that it's an absolute fire hose. And so, once you kind of, to get the kind of like advantage out of actually finding the really useful bits of information, you really kind of have to, I suppose you have to quite like fire hoses, and B, you kind of need to kind of really get the hang of it to work out how to get on top of it. But I think that's pretty much a challenge for us in any event about information, deluge of information. In terms of Twitter and evidence-based healthcare, I think there's some quite specific things about healthcare and certainly about science. Both of those kind of aspects are related to Twitter. And one of those, I'll sort of start with the issue about sharing studies. This has become a really major issue for people who are researchers in particular, partly because people are putting more and more emphasis on people try to show that their research had some kind of impact. And for the people who are trying to read that in case it's too small, this is my favourite ancient Greek philosopher who meta-analyses, who's believed to be related to Hippocrates, a collector of research findings. Sorry, it's a very in-joke. Now, the issue about people having to try and demonstrate that their research is having impact, one of the ways that people are measuring that is by how many tweets there are about it. So you're getting a real kind of effort of encouraging researchers to actually start to use Twitter to promote their research. So consequently, it means that there's actually quite a lot of researchers there, but it is a way to find out about studies, but also to get into discussions about them. I mean, one of the things that sort of that's kind of been firing up my end of Twitter and the evidence-based healthcare end of Twitter this week is two particular studies that have kind of been blazing around the media around Alzheimer's. One that was around a drug that was shown, that really had negative trial results, but in the English media in particular, it's got promoted as the cure to Alzheimer having been found, which is really quite an extraordinary phenomenon, but that's another discussion. And so you've got a bunch of people trying to counteract that and say, no, that's not what that trial found, and a massive discussion around that one. And the other that I really got into with yet another round of people claiming that brain training can prevent the people who actually have a kind of a website to sell, and the price of that particular one kind of went up too in this process, trying to sort of say that they've got this profoundly effective kind of trial around it. And so a bunch of us are in quite a heated debate about that at the moment. And so that's the kind of potential that it has for people just to start to get involved in discussions about individual studies, as well as finding out which studies people think are important. When I said media-centred discussion, I couldn't think of a way to put this bullet point quickly on together. But what I mean here is it's related to that function of so many journalists being on Twitter, that this is there's both that ability to have those kind of one-on-one conversations with journalists, but in addition, that whole process of Twitter chats that Kay was already just talking about then. You'll see quite a lot of TV stations and all sorts of people who've got their doctor, I'm not going to name any particular one, but they will do these Twitter chats quite a lot. And that actually, it becomes, a few times I've done that. You've gone in when you knew it was going to be really big, and go in there with some, sitting there knowing you've got all your resources there about your evidence-based information, and just sit there, watch it, see what questions people ask, throw in some links to things that would be good for them to read, that kind of thing. Those things can actually get really quite huge. You can be talking about, like, sometimes sort of hundreds of thousands of people seeing individual tweets and so on. So it really is quite a phenomenon in terms of people discussing healthcare as much as anything else. That whole process of live tweeting conferences really has become a quite important part of Twitter in sort of scientists and healthcare and other sectors too, but that's actually a really key part. Twitter chats that we were just talking about, where everybody gets together around a hashtag on a particular day in some shape or form. If you're at all interested in trying to see what's happening in healthcare, this website that I've put there, simpler.com, it's really the kind of go-to place about that. That's where people register their hashtags for Twitter chats, for meetings and conferences, and you can see what is that. What does that hashtag even mean? But it'll tell you when, especially when people have regular Twitter chats about a particular disease or whatever, you can get all of that kind of information there. And then the last thing, of course, is that issue that's the kind of obvious one, that it's a place for you to share resources to the part of your community that's active on this platform. And that becomes, particularly when there's a controversy or something has just happened quite quickly, that process of people wanting to know, take that example of the Alzheimer's trial, the two Alzheimer's trials I was just talking about. If people in a hurry want to know, hey, is that a good trial or is it a bad trial? Or, what are people who've had the time to look at it, what are they saying about it? That process of actually being able to link people to, sometimes it can be like an infographic, sometimes it could be somebody's written a quick blog post or whatever whatever the resources are about, is this a real thing? Is this something that's been debunked? You know, those kinds of processes. People who are active in their own kind of personal networks actually really need to have something. Are really kind of looking for people who will send them stuff out that they can actually respond to things, because it's a real cascade, isn't it? Pretty much any social network of this information goes out in this kind of like widely distributed network of people, and then everybody in their little cluster of who, they may be a few, they may be thousands, they may be hundreds of thousands. For some people, they've got kind of like an audience of millions, but this information just goes out there, and people. But there has to be a source for it. In terms of controversies, I put this together, and it's actually kind of I don't know if you. I hope you can see that. This is actually really was my effort from going through the kind of historical information for a blog post that I wrote, to kind of put this in perspective and understand that kind of broader social process that's going on here. The World Wide Web emerged in the 1990s. This is when Greenpeace began its anti-GMO activism. That was at a particular conference in Italy. Just around then, that was when the Wakefield link to vaccines and autism happened in The Lancet. Now, these kinds of things, both of these kinds of things, were already started to be driven by the internet. But by the 2000s, you got social media involved. And now once you get a kind of controversy or whatever actually now take hold strongly across the internet, it starts to actually have a really quite massive impact on people. So coming into the 2000s was when 50% of us were on the internet. By 2010, more than 80% of the US was on the internet. And this gets us to a point where we can actually say that less than half of adults in the US may be sure that vaccines don't cause autism, and 5 to 10% of them are sure that they do. And this was never actually a thing. It was never a real thing. And yet it could get to this kind of a place. And we don't actually know anywhere near as much about what to do about this. There's this I'd really recommend this to read to anybody who's interested in this topic at all, in a medical anthropology journal, where they actually identify something that they call Pinterest thinking. And they said basically we're kind of going out there now, picking up bits and pieces of information all over, and we're making a kind of collage in our minds. We talk a lot in evidence-based healthcare about this process of systematic reviewing and saying, here's my criteria, this is what I'm going to take seriously, I'm going to go, that whole kind of process that would be familiar to a lot of people, most people in this room. This isn't actually how we go about life. We don't even remember where we saw things or heard things. Whatever we expose ourselves to, little bits of it stick in all sorts of ways and are having all kinds of unconscious effects on how our pictures are getting together. But people are putting together these kind of self-curated assemblages of notions, often with bits and pieces that are not. They don't even have to form a coherent narrative. We're capable of all putting together things that are actually mutually contradictory, but we're creating these individual images, and from multiple sources and diverse criteria. And this is really the kind of environment in which we can't actually afford, I don't think, to just say, let it go, I'm not interested in social media or whatever, because this is actually where a lot of people's opinions, and that we need as many people as possible to be out there getting involved in these different platforms. I'll quickly go through these individually, so we don't have to sort of go into this too much at this point, but by going through a lot of literature about trying to work out what the place of social media was in dealing specifically with controversies and trying to work it out, because for me this is really important. I'm on Twitter explicitly, personally, it's an activist agenda. It may not look like it, but it really is what it is. And so I'm actually really quite concerned with how to do that in an evidence-based way. This is difficult because for something as phenomenally as important as this, it's amazing how little research there is, and how virtually no systematic reviews of any kind of quality. So you have to kind of really put in a lot of work to try and keep up with the evidence. This is the best set of issues that I can distill out of it. And one I'll go through these. Actually, it's probably going to be better if I go through them individually. One of these is that that social media, and Twitter is a particularly good example of this, is that it can mediate between the scientific and general community, which is clearly one of the roles of pretty much everybody in this room that does that just on a kind of daily basis in all sorts of different ways. But it really is, it is a bridge. And in a sense, it doesn't matter which one of those social media bridges you're really interested and involved in, because there are always going to be a certain proportion of people who cross platforms, who'll sort of see something on Twitter and then they'll go and take it into Facebook and that kind of stuff. That's not really completely reliable. Things can be a really big deal on one platform that just don't even appear on another. But there are kind of like bridges forming around the place. That's one, I think, that's something that everybody kind of here already kind of does. Another issue that's a really important challenge for us is negotiating conspiracism, which really is, in all sorts of areas of our lives, really on the rise. And you can really sort of see, because it's one of the things that the internet is astonishingly good at, is spreading misinformation and wild theories. And, hey, did you hear X, Y, unbelievable Z, it happens incredibly quickly. We're not at all good at knowing how to debunk these things. I mean, there's people who claim that there's studies that show certain things about debunking, but I've kind of looked and pulled as many of them as I can together, and there are conflicting studies, and we really don't know how to do it. The one thing that we know for sure is to try and nip it in the bud. That's probably about the only thing that could possibly work, is to try and get these things before something like that vaccines and autism thing takes root. That's how we do that. I don't entirely know either, but we've got to try. The other is an issue that's generally about literacy of all kinds. One of those is to reduce individuals' vulnerability to the claim that the cure for Alzheimer's has been found or whatever. So social media, any kind of way that we're talking to different people with different stories or different examples, or all the different ways that we go about things, is an opportunity to kind of reduce people's vulnerability to getting conned in whatever way, shape or form, or letting their what they hope is true carry them away into something that actually might cause them harm. Another thing is that we have to learn better how to counter motivated reasoning. That's probably our really biggest challenge in many ways, because we all do it. And in this kind of process of saying, I want this end result to be true, and therefore I'm going to find all the bits of information that confirm it. I'm going to create a narrative around the things that I see that get me to the belief point of what I want to be true, or what my preconceived idea was of what was going to be true. And this is an incredibly difficult process, and it's hard to sort of be the party pooper all the time, trying to say to people, well, actually, no, that's not true, or whatever. It's a thing that we have to work out how to do. I don't entirely know how we can do it best based on evidence for other people. I think the most important thing, though, is for us all to actually start with ourselves, because there is nobody that doesn't have this problem, like nobody at all. And so working very hard to counteract our own biases is the place that we've really got to, at least that we've got to start. What might be some of the things that help? I think there's some sort of compelling arguments that people are making around these two things. Creating virtuous spirals of trust. Now, that article that I referred to earlier by Sobo, the Pinterest thinking article, It's actually got some quite good things in there. This is actually based a lot on some qualitative research, with a really good, strong sort of foundation to it. And some of the stories in there actually really encapsulate the importance of this notion that some other people have called creating virtual spirals of trust. And what you often see happen on places like Twitter or Facebook or whatever, that a whole lot of people who actually believe something really quite strongly, when the thing starts to get heated or a bit crazy or whatever, they just go quiet. And people can get the impression that everybody in that circle agrees with something that people are saying. See what I mean? You kind of get that whole process of who are the loudest voices in any kind of group can end up dominating opinion and giving people a skewed idea of what is actually socially acceptable in that group. I think there's a real gender issue here around women in particular wanting to avoid conflict often, which ends up actually skewing huge amounts of these things. People get kind of too easily upset and then retreat from the conversation, and that can often mean the sanest voices are the ones that have been silenced. And that's a really chronic problem that we've all got. But there's this thing that can counter it. That's to actually day in, day out, ensure that you've built up people who've actually got around them people who trust them. And then if the proverbial hits the fan one day, there's going to be a certain number of people that turn to those people and say, what is that person saying? You know, and that seems to me one of the few things that logically we can say this is something that we can bring into this process. And counteracting the merchants of doubt, you can't just let this stuff, that the people who are actually trying to make people doubt facts, and for a lot of people that's actually their jobs, to actually mislead people in certain kinds of ways or market certain ideas or whatever. And you can't just let that grow. You have to deal with it early on. This is one of, I've kind of alluded to it, I think right from the start, and it's something that I think is incredibly important. And that is how we can, in these environments, learn to survive and reduce cyberbullying. This is incredibly true, especially if somebody, the reason this is a young woman of colour in this cartoon was because that is who is actually the most vulnerable to this on the internet. I mean, if you've never seen it, and if you've never been at the receiving end of what's happening to a whole lot of people on the internet in general, and including Twitter, you actually really should. I mean, it's awful because in a sense you can't unsee it once you've seen it. It is really quite a horrendous thing. Having said that, we also have a problem of making people too scared of it. You know, I mean, it's like all of those processes with any kind of bullying. A lot of the power of it is people's fear of it. And so we actually we also kind of like need to defang this and sort of say, you know what, actually, it doesn't have to be, you know, as upsetting as you think it is. And we have to kind of learn to not fear these communities and platforms because of it, and work out how do we actually support each other and keep these kind of processes outside of our little networks and our communities, and how do we support people when it's happening. I was just because of certain things that I've written, from time to time, I get a wave of this. I mean, there was one weekend where I had to kind of, at that time I used to block people, now I mute them, which I think is a quite critical and important difference in strategy on Twitter and social media generally. But I had to block like 200 people in 2 days, you know, which at the time it felt like it was a hell of a lot more than that. It was a very traumatic weekend. When I looked back and counted it up, I went, God, that was only 200. Felt like I was being bombarded by thousands. And in that process, I then end up going and trying to sort of study this a lot and see what people are saying about what you can do about it. And I think there's a range of things. One is not to let it frighten you in the end. Is to remember it is only virtual. It really is. People have to kind of try and make sure that it actually doesn't have consequences, real consequences in people's lives. And we can actually counteract this. And I've kind of seen this a lot at the times now when a wave of it comes at me. I can kind of, I tell people, look, just send good vibes at the same time. The first thing that's important to do is not to drag other people into it, because if you start, CCing a bunch of people, so like tweeting to a group of people in the middle of this kind of storm, every single person from your community that you've just put in that thing, and especially if one of them is a person of colour, is now going to be a target of everybody who knows where you are. So you don't want to draw it in on other people. But absolutely call for help, because there are people who are willing to come out and try and help. And at the same time, even if you want to, we all have to learn how to be bystanders. And that's one of the only good sources of bullying literature is what people are learning about bullying in schools. And this is about the bully, it's about the person who's being bullied, and it's about the bystanders. And none of this succeeds if bystanders don't allow it to happen and sort of come to the rescue. And it certainly takes away the distress. And you don't even have to buy into it. If you're a person who gets Twitter, you get all these kind of like notifications of what's coming, of who's kind of saying something about you on your Twitter feed. But if a whole bunch of people just come in and start sending you good feedback, even if it's completely separate from what's going on, they don't have to get involved in that controversy. They can just start pressing favourite and like and stuff on things that you've tweeted that's got nothing to do with it. But these happy smiling faces of nice people are coming in there to kind of like dilute out the ugliness, and absolutely go to the help of anybody else who's being bullied whenever you can. In terms of healthcare controversies now, I think that one of the things that we do, and this comes back to that thing about the spirals of trust and who's going to believe you, it's really hard to believe somebody or take seriously what somebody's saying when you can see they have no respect for you. And this is a kind of like a real danger, I think, in internet culture generally, and it's more or less in different cultures on different platforms. It's a real problem on Twitter. I know I have to kind of restrain myself. Like, I'm a cartoonist. I mean, the things that I'd like to tweet and say that have come into my head, and the things that I think, it's kind of, I could be just snark central from morning to night. And I'd feel very smart, and I'd probably have 40,000 followers really quite quickly, but I'm not going to do it. Because it sort of absolutely runs counter to the idea that I want to kind of be a place where people could see that I respect them and aren't going to put them down. Okay, I do sometimes, but I try really hard not to. Having said sort of some negative things about it, I mean, it's like anything. It's going to work better for you if you actually like it and you come to understand this culture and embrace it. Whack-a-learner is just one of my favourite kind of internet terms. It's apparently supposed to come from kind of lunatic and whack job, kind of, is where this kind of word came from. I absolutely love it. But there's many things to really like about internet culture, as well as there is to be concerned about it. I think for all of us, we've got a lot of issues to think about around when you use an organisational voice and when you use a personal voice, and what your policies are going to be at an organisation. Now, I'm really lucky to work at the National Institutes of Health, and it's got fantastic social media policy and support where I'm really clear. I very rarely feel like I'm in a grey zone. It's detailed, it's solid. Same for its Wikipedia policy. I really know where I'm at, and I really think that that's a valuable thing for everybody to have. But there's a real difference between organisational voices and personal voices. Some people really want to see what an organisational account said, but a real lot of other people want to see what a person said. And people are different that way. And you shouldn't be afraid, I don't think, of letting people from the organisation end up developing a really strong Twitter profile of themselves as an individual, but you do have to know how to keep your personal and your sort of more professional profiles apart. Gaining Twitter skills is really quite important. Understanding that whole business about what is a retweet, what does how you keep the etiquette going, that you don't just steal other people's tweets, they'll get really ticked. So you've got to try and say HT, which is heard through, or via, or just always acknowledge your source, even if there was sort of this person got it from this person, got it from this person. There's a limit. You can't kind of put everybody, but at least where you got it, you should always put it. It's worth actually spending some time, if you're at all serious about it, to read the things about how Twitter works that Twitter has put together, because people make so many really basic mistakes. One of the most common ones that you see is that people reply to somebody else and think they've tweeted. But when you're replying to somebody, the only people who see it is the person you replied to and anyone who follows both you and them. So you actually haven't sent out a tweet. You've actually now narrowed down a more personal form of communication. And that's why you'll see people put things like a dot in front of the A, or a space in front of the A, the at sign, or whatever. They're doing that so that everybody who follows them sees the tweet. With Twitter in particular, this isn't true of every social network, you've got to go into your settings from time to time, at least once or twice a year, because they'll change their policies and they'll change their settings without telling you. And so you've really got to see, have they done something that's now changing what you're seeing or what your privacy settings are or whatever. And you can learn a lot in there about using tweets and understanding their analytics. There, you can use tweets really well now in blogs and other places. So that's the time, and we'll have a discussion now. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So now we'll open it up for discussions. The stand mics right here. You can line up to ask questions. And I would also like to take this opportunity to remind everyone to please fill out their evaluations. Yes, those are very important for us. So as we go along today, if you could fill out the evaluations, that would be very helpful for us. Thank you so much.
So, Hilda, I have a question. While you're speaking and at other times at meetings, I tweet, and I never know, how do you know if you're doing a good job or not? Like, speakers, you included, say some people are good at tweeting, some aren't. I don't know what's good. How do we find out?
Well, it depends what you mean by good. It's kind of like there's the kind of obvious thing. If what you want is that you want a lot of people to see it, then all of those things like retweets and so on is kind of the way that you'd look at it. I think also in particular it's who did, because just looking at something, just saying this thing got 20 retweets. But if it's 20 retweets from people who each have 5 followers, that's not the same as if there's one retweet from somebody with a lot of followers. I had the single tweet that, as far as I know, has got the most impact of any tweet I ever sent, had very few retweets, but one of them was Mark Cuban. Which led me with all sorts of sports people suddenly starting to follow me, which was really weird. They didn't last long. But within sort of minutes, there'd been 250,000 people, according to Twitter, had seen that tweet, and that's that kind of like right up at that kind of end of the impact that somebody like that has. Whereas for most of us, it's kind of not many people are going to see or really see the things that we tweet. What does good mean? I mean, people like different kinds of things, and there's kind of all sorts of subcultures and countercultures on Twitter. I think it's a question of who do you think is good? And that's certainly what I do whenever I get involved in any kind of new community or any kind of new communication medium or something. I first spend quite a lot of time watching and trying to find out who the people are who are really successful in a way that I admire and I like. And then, whittle out from those the ones that I couldn't possibly do what they do because I just don't have the skills, particular kind of skills that they have. But then find the things that are, that are the match for my personality and my skills, and then aspire to that. There are some people who tweet about things that I'm not even remotely interested in what they tweet about. I follow them because they are maestros, the way they... the 140 characters become almost like a haiku or something with some people. Some people are just utter ninjas at this, and it's... that's always awesome to watch anybody who's at the top of their game. That's just cool. But it's like anything. It's like if you want to write, you have to read, so if you want to tweet well, you need to watch a lot of people who tweet well. It's probably not all that helpful, but that's the best I've got.
Hi, I'm Suchi Iyer from AHRQ. And coming from that evidence-based medicine world, I'm curious about how Twitter handles changing information, or information that changes over time. Because it seems to me like Twitter is a snapshot of what one thinks at that moment, but as one reflects, you may change your opinion or the evidence may change. And how is Twitter at capturing that?
Well, I think Twitter's probably better than many places. Twitter's very ephemeral. It's not completely ephemeral, but it's pretty, it's sort of very, very transient. It's there and then it kind of disappears a fair bit. And, but it's not a place that's creating some self-correcting record or something. It's just things floating past everybody constantly. So I actually think it's really quite good at this, because if you look at a lot of the people who are really having quite a really big impact on Twitter. Now, right now I'm thinking about Neuroskeptic, who's a person clearly with an acronym, a pseudonym for their name, who's a neuroscientist blogger. And a large part of what makes him successful, and it is him, is that he is a place that people can keep up to date with things. And he spends a lot of time doing that. And that's actually something that people really quite value. And so, I think it can be extremely good, but it's got the same problems that everything else has got. When we see things on the internet, we see things anywhere. There are certain people, Teddy, you'd be with me on this about Ian Chalmers. There's this person in the Cochrane collaboration who he will tell you about something he read 30 years ago, and he'll tell you, and I think it's on page 248. This is no exaggeration. And when you go, sure enough, it is on page 248 when you go looking for it. It is utterly astonishing, but that's freakish. Most people don't remember where they saw anything, what the credibility of it is, just something that's stuck in your mind. And sometimes you're really sure you remember, and it turns out later you were wrong because you go looking for it. It isn't where, it wasn't in JAMA, or it wasn't in, So we just have an overall problem with this. There's nowhere that's good at at kind of calibrating what people have got in their mind when the knowledge has changed. This is a really, really hard thing for us in every kind of medium or every aspect of our communities. I think Twitter's actually that's actually, I think, one of Twitter's strengths.
Hello. I'm Lori Frank with the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. Thanks so much for your presentation. So I know next to nothing about Twitter, but very interested in it. And at PCORI, there are a lot of people who know a lot more than I do. But my question is about whether there are moderated spaces or whether you see that as a potential evolution, a good housekeeping seal of approval, so that there can be some vetting, but also to permit protection from some of the dangers out there, especially with regard to the way evidence is put out and bandied about.
I think, in a sense, what's happening on Twitter is that that it's very hierarchical. Twitter. It's got its sort of like status system that's around how many followers you've got, and it's really, there's these big people at the top and the vast majority of people that people aren't necessarily listening to, and there's absolutely no necessarily a sort of sense of like there's some kind of, in a sense, like what I'm trying to say is I think it's the wrong question, because this is a social medium. And the nature of the beast is that certain people and certain organisations rise in it and gain social influence. Now, that could be somebody who is like Thomas Friedman from CDC through to the Food Babe, which is about, like as far from evidence-based, but with massive social influence as you can get. So, and you can't change that. It's the nature of social network. The social network determines this. And seals of approval in any event, I mean, I'm really dubious about them. Now, I can't remember where I saw this, but I really did see this. And could actually, it was actually in Germany. I used to work in Germany before I came to America, and these people did this really great study there where they took a bunch of seals of approval about quality patient information, including one that didn't exist, and asked all these questions about, do you recognise this thing? Do you trust it? Do you trust the things that are there more? And the one that didn't exist was as well trusted and as well recognised as the Hon Code and a whole bunch of quite famous ones. I don't actually think people have necessarily shown, post-internet era, that this is a way to go. I think we're at the time where kind of what gets to the top of Google has a lot of impact. Who rises to the top of social networks, and I don't know that. I'm just not convinced that that's an intervention that we know works in the internet age.
So I was somebody who was prepared not to be at all convinced by your argument that to change your views. I'm a Twitter skeptic, but your point about moderate voices and informed voices being silenced in times when things get frantic resonates with me considerably. And I guess I'm looking for advice if I'm going to move into this sphere. How to not become, to me, the information overload, the idea of information coming in all the time from places that you don't know if it's to be trusted. How do you continue to be a reasonable voice in all of this noise? And do you have any advice for somebody who, for the first time, is giving some credit to the idea of joining the Twitterverse?
Cool. I think one of the things is first to find out who you're going to follow and start to see where you can get something that you like and enjoy out of this. And And that would be, I think, talking to some people who can sort of recommend things. Don't be afraid to stop following something, somebody or an account or a person. If you don't want to hurt people's feelings, there's a mechanism in Twitter where you just create lists. Like I now follow 900, I think, 900 something people. I don't look at 900 something people's tweets. And there's a bunch that I wouldn't want to unfollow now, but I'm not going to watch their tweets. I have created lists, and it's only people who are on my lists, which are not public, so you don't know who they are. You can do that privately. Nobody has to get offended. And I look at the tweets of the, on a busy day, there's a set of only about 80. And so you could really say there are 80 people that I really, really follow. And then if it's not a busy day, I've got another one that there's 300 on, So that becomes that thing about how do you curate it. And until you've worked that out, not a lot of people are going to listen to what you say anyway, because you need to acquire followers for people to see your tweets. So it's a process of if you want to be, but still, if you want to have an effect that when you jump in, it's not only how many followers you've got that says whether people are going to pay attention when you replied. So, say for example, something quite controversial is happening. A lot of people do look at a particular tweet and then see who said something. And even that array of faces, because on Twitter the person's avatar is prominent there. So that actually becomes really quite important. What your avatar is, what your name is, and what your bio is will affect how people feel about it if you've come in and liked them or retweeted them. So in a sense, that emotional impact you have on that person who feels now a little bit supported when all this other, and then they look at your bio and they go, oh, that's a person whose opinion I believe and respect. So my advice to you would be to think really carefully about what your name is. Make sure it's short. That's why my Twitter handle's not my full name, because I decided I care about a few characters more than I do about people getting my name right. And I personally really quite strongly believe that it's really important what your avatar is. I mean, if you've ever been, as I said, on the receiving end of this really hateful, misogynistic, racist stuff coming at you, just their avatars is already distressing. And I really like seeing faces of nice, decent human beings popping up in my thing, just like humans. I really like that. I mean, some people have really nice, funny characters and all that kind of stuff, and that's kind of also cool, but you just have to think through what you want that to be, and then make sure you've got a bio that people will believe what you say. I think you have to be really careful. People say retweets aren't endorsements, but they kind of are. And so I think be really careful, even if you're thinking, that's really funny or whatever. Stop and think. I mean, Twitter is your ultimate test of impulse control. It really is. And, you can sort of, on reflection, 2 minutes later, you can think, eek, actually, that's a bit sexist, or that's a bit off in some way, or actually, I didn't actually read that. I didn't even read the abstract, never mind the actual article. What have I just done, And over time, as the kind of number of people, it's been for me a kind of process, as more people have followed me, I've actually started to tweet less and less, because each day I'll look at this bunch of things, what study I'm prepared to tweet now, and what I'm prepared to retweet. It's kind of the standard's going, I can't. Oh, God, I can't send that one. And, oh, no, not that one either. Oh, bugger, I don't have a single interesting thing to tweet about today, because it's all dodgy for one reason or another. But that stuff is actually really quite important, because is that, I can't remember if that's an American thing or it's just a European thing, that trust arrives on foot but leaves on horseback. You know, if what you really want, you know, you're only going to be as kind of trusted as your worst tweet. That was grim. Please don't let that be the last thing.
I don't want to hog the microphone, but if no one else is here. So I guess, you know, where I'm coming from is I don't want more to do. But if Twitter is a source of information about great papers, you know, and great information that then I can follow up, I don't want to miss anything either, which is sort of that line between personal and organizational, I guess, and who we are at the end of the day. So that's the part that scares me, is I don't want to get, I have followed a bunch of people and then I get sucked into all this, like, stuff I really am not that interested in. And so are you saying the way not to get sucked in is then just limit who you're following? But it's tricky. I mean, there's so many things we could be doing to increase what we know. How do you actually narrow it down so that this is something valuable? Because that's the investment of time to figure out what's valuable is probably the problem.
For me, I mean, a lot of people aren't going to think it is. Either you end up, either the return you're getting is worth it or it isn't, and that's going to be I've just got like a massive commitment to this platform and just decided I'm going to really stick with this one and make this one work. You know, I'm really stuffed, aren't I? If it disappears, because I really have put a lot of eggs into that basket. But I mean, I think that becomes, it's like anything else. You've got your kind of like whatever your management skills are going to be for this kind of a thing. For me, the way I do it is that, as I said, I put all these people on these different, I have these different kind of lists of different categories, and when I follow somebody, I categorise them. If I followed somebody new, they always go in at the top till I see what I get out of it. I deliberately, and for me it's really important that I follow people who have got ideas that are very different to my own in a kind of a social sense. Like I moved to this country 5 years ago. I mean, I have learned so much about African Americans from Twitter, from just following people who I just learned so much from that's got nothing to do with papers, but teach me a real lot about this culture. If I get interested in, like, there's a particular controversy and then I really want to understand, I mean, I didn't need to, I'd already had the opportunity a long time ago to sort of understand issues around vaccination or whatever, but something new comes up and I want to understand, then it's that thing, I'm not only interested in a bubble, I'll also look sometimes at people who've got the absolute opposite view because I want to understand why on earth do they believe that? And at a certain point, you watch them for long enough, you get to understand. Same reason that I watch Fox News and all sorts of different things. You know, it's like, I want to understand this. And there's no, this is an unparalleled way of doing that because you don't get necessarily to see inside other people's social networks and ways they interact with each other and the language that they use and understand why this thing is a trigger and this thing is soothing and those kinds of things. So they're kind of a thing to say that if you're concerned about kind of the social sides of things, you know, not to underplay that. About the thing about the information, then that really does become that, well, you just have to sort of calibrate the number of tweets that come through for the amount of time you want to give to it. And for that, for me, the way I do it is that I have these different lists, and if somebody's starting to aggravate me, you know, I'll kind of like put them in the sin bin for a while and maybe bring them back later when that issue or whatever is over and I can get back to it. Or if this person's like, oh no, that's the 50th tweet they sent today, I can't stand it anymore, you know, then I kind of move them out, and then maybe they come back, or then if something is about a certain issue, then I know, okay, over here in this list I've got all those people, now I'm going to go and see what they're saying. So it just becomes that shuffle them around.
We actually have to pause for break right now, but if there are further questions, please feel free to speak with Hilda during the break.
I'm staying all day.
And during lunch, yeah, of course. And Hilda, thank you so much for such a wonderful, thought-provoking discussion.
Thank you.